Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Traumaplicity podcast with your host, Dr. Amanda Hellman, author, cognitive release coach, and speaker. And Traumaplicity is trauma plus simplicity. And you might think, why both of that? But it takes simple steps to begin our healing process. And our brain likes simple. As much as we like to complicate things, our brain loves simple. And so it gives us the encouragement to move forward. And there you have Traumaplicity. Traumaplicity podcast happens every week, and you can tune in on Wednesday at 7 p.m. on my Facebook page, also on the podcast, and we also have a YouTube channel. So certainly you want to catch different guests, and I'm excited in a moment to introduce Nichole, but we have different guests who share their story, encourage you with different strategies and tools or techniques that they have used to help them along their journey, and words of encouragement for you wherever you are. And with that said, I'm so happy to introduce my guest, Nichole Myles. And Nichole has an amazing background and just lots of plethora of different experiences. I'm really excited to talk about that. So she's bringing more than 20 years of experience in education, nonprofits, and leadership. Nichole Myles weaves together compelling storytelling with experience and expertise to engage listeners in a journey to self-discovery, the ups and downs of growth, and what it takes to come back from trauma. Having gone from a traditional upper middle class life to losing everything, living in domestic violence shelters, and having to rebuild an entire life while raising 3 children, Nichole doesn't just speak about post-traumatic growth, she's lived it. Nichole carries a CAGS in nonprofit management, a CFRE, certified fundraising executive designation, a DEI, diverse equity inclusion certificate, and 2 levels of professional certifications in trauma and resilience. Her master's in organizational psychology with a coaching and consulting concentration is expected early 2023. She uses her education to hone in poignant personal stories into opportunities for participants to glean critical steps to their own growth, to examine what they've overcome and how to lean into that experience to amplify their futures. And she's currently working as an expert companion in the position of speaker, facilitator, consultant, or coach, helping move clients from survivor to thrivership. So Nichole, it's so great to really hear your expertise, and we have some crossing of paths looking at leadership, mental health, and education. So I love that. And even just part of your whole story and everything that you're continuing to pursue in order to help many people. And so I'd love to hear part of your story right now.
Of course. So thank you so much for having me on Traumaplicity. I think this is such important work. And I'm really glad that you're out there delivering a message that we can get over our trauma and that we can find simple, basic ways to help ourselves, because those little steps make a really huge difference. And so a little bit of my background, you did get that I am a domestic abuse survivor, and it was a pretty extreme situation for us. But what I really like to talk about when I share the story isn't necessarily the really awful stuff that happened. For one thing, we know, you know this, that trauma works in our bodies no matter what trauma it is. So anybody who's card filing whether their level of trauma raises my level of trauma or not will be dismissive of their own suffering, and we don't want that. So where I'll start is really what happened after we left the shelters and had been homeless, and there were 3 kids and a life to build, and kind of the noise of feeling like I needed to get things back. I was really consumed by this notion that if I could just get back the life I'd had before, it was going to be okay. Like that was going to be my triumph, was that I was going to have it all back and I was going to get things back like they used to be. So I thought, I'd get my home back and I would get my career back and I would kind of reclaim all of these things. And that was not the path actually for me to take. It stuck me in this cycle of feeling like I was not good enough. It stuck me in this cycle of trying to be somebody I wasn't anymore. And I really had to take a step back and say, who am I now? What have I learned from this situation? What do I want? What do I actually want? Because if you really pause for a minute coming out of your trauma, it's possible that the thing you had is actually not the thing you want anymore. I know that's not the case often for grief and loss, but for all of us with trauma, there is the moment of saying, what does it look like to go forward? And that go forward is going to be different from what was in our past. And that was really my turning point coming out of trauma, was giving up kind of, it was everything. It was, I kept getting my hair cut the same way I used to get my hair cut, because these very little things that kept kind of poking at me about my old life. And when I finally said, you can't have that anymore, you can't have that, that's when growth started to happen for me.
That's really powerful. I love how you said sometimes we have these old habits or even ways of thinking, and they're just tied to old things in our life. And then we're shifting it by making new, almost like those neural pathways, but really new ways of thinking, new different ways we do our hair. So I love that you share that. And I also love your sensitivity to the audience, where different people may be in different places, and every trauma matters. Every trauma, every experience that we've had definitely does. So I love that you shared about that. And obviously through these experiences, through what you've been through, has really brought you to where you are today, right? In your journey and what you do for other people. And so in your journey, and you shared some of this, where was the point where you just knew you were called to then share and help other people? Like, you paved a way for some people, but when did you know, oh goodness, I'm going to start either sharing my story or helping other people who might be on the same trajectory?
So that actually took a really long time for me. I would sort of subtly, I think, as a lot of us do with trauma, share our story quietly, or maybe with a small ladies group or something. And I was kind of getting the same feedback, right? You're so brave, you're so resilient. There's kind of all this noise and labeling around what happens when we survive a trauma, that is well-intentioned, but is not helpful. And I got to the place of consistently hearing, you need to tell more people, you need to tell more people, but I didn't want to tell that kind of trauma explosive story. I didn't want a Lifetime movie story. And it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to tell people, because what I wanted to offer was that what was different about me than many of the people I met kind of in traumatic situations that I was sharing with, was that I did manage eventually to kind of turn that corner and start to rebuild my life. I picked a new career. I excelled in it. I started lots of education. I think we learn forever. So I just keep chasing education. And when I started to read the research, that made me different from a lot of other folks in trauma. We get stuck where we are, and I'm not special. There's nothing unique about me. So I started to try to deconstruct what choices I had made that helped me move forward, that maybe I could share that with other people. And along the way, I found out about something called post-traumatic growth, which maybe several of your listeners know about. I sure didn't. It's been around since the 1990s. It was researched as part of the positive psychology movement. So Dr. Robert Levine and Dr. Richard Tedeschi really explored exactly what I was wondering, which is what makes some of us kind of be able to turn a corner from trauma, and what makes some of us get stuck in it. And they came up with all these steps. So in 2021, during COVID, Dr. Tedeschi actually released an article in the Harvard Business Review in which he started to outline what post-traumatic growth could actually do, and the role of folks called expert companions, which is what you read in my bio. And that really solidified for me. So, we're talking 12, 13 years past my abuse. I'd done a lot of growing. I'd done a lot of work. I'd done a lot of quiet talking about this. But that really solidified for me that I could study and find something that I could then apply to other people, so that we can look at trauma. I use the word thrivership. I think we've lowered the bar way too much on all trauma survivors. There's this kind of like, but you're so lucky to be here still. You're so lucky to have survived. And that's such a diminishing, disempowering kind of a situation to find yourself in, because look, it's hard. It is really hard. And when I studied post-traumatic growth, there were spaces for that hard. and I could help guide people through that hard and then help them grow. And that was really my big turning point. Wasn't really that long ago. So I'd also say to your listeners, if you're wondering if you've had this trauma and you're thinking, what do I do with it? How can I help people? Give yourself time and wait until it's clear for you. I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do until it found me. And I'm so thrilled that it did, because this feels right.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, and even your journey about the post-traumatic growth, and even the years that you really worked through a lot of that and then figured out, where do you want to go? Who are you, and what is it that you want to bring forth when you're working with other people? So I think that's amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that, Nichole. And for the audience, just hearing that and being able to process that, there are ways to get out of those areas of trauma. There are different ways to shift how we're thinking. So certainly, thank you. And then as we continue the conversation, we're really looking at strategies, tools, techniques, anything that has helped you along this journey that may be helpful to the audience.
Sure. So I think that's so important too, that you got to have a card file of tools. And I think I look at healing, Dr. Hellman, is a little bit of I look at healing as a wound management, right? You're not going to, the scar is still going to be there. The scar still is going to get bumped every now and then, and it's going to hurt. And you have to be able to learn to accept that and find ways to manage it. There's not, or at least there hasn't been for me, kind of the magic moment where I got up and said, this doesn't hurt anymore, I'm all better. And sometimes I think we're delivering that message, that, folks that don't understand trauma don't necessarily, they think there's an end and they want to know when you're over it. I had a dear friend that used to say, like, when are you going to stop? Like, when is it going to stop hurting? I was like, I can't really name that space. I can name that in the space that I was growing, I had to really learn some very simple tools. One of them, of course, one of the regrets I have when I was healing and rebuilding my nonprofit career and things, is that I didn't go to therapy. I didn't go seek that help because I was so in that survivor space. I was so in that doing that every day. And if we just got up and kids got to school and nothing fell apart and I found a place to live, I wasn't taking care of myself at all. That's also probably one of the reasons it took me so long to get to the place of finding my purpose. So therapy, if you can, find a therapist, keep looking. If the therapist you get to isn't a fit for you, find another one. It's okay. It's absolutely okay to be like, this is not a match. And keep looking until you find one. Not necessarily, it is a simple tool in that you need to go find your person and then that person is there for you. I thoroughly believe in therapy, even though I coach people. That's a very different role than therapy. And so I recommend therapy, but I also had to really find some ways to ground myself and start to understand that things are going to be triggered in this healing journey. Sometimes that scar is going to hurt again for a moment, and I have to know what I can do for myself. And one of those other big sort of societal things we're doing right now is self-care. Self-care has become this marketed thing, right? Self-care is like a spa, or it's going to get a massage. And maybe it is for some people, but a lot of us don't have the resources for that. And it's not an immediate fix. So it's really learning some basic, what do you need in this moment tools, and evaluating what self-care means for you is probably completely different from what self-care means for me, even if our traumas are the same. What we need to do to ground ourselves. And so I really recommend to listeners that you find 3 things. Find 3 things that you can ground yourself with. I find the very simple senses activity still to this day really good. So if you don't know what that is, listeners, that's 5 things, 4 things, 3 things, 2 things, 1 thing. You're literally counting backwards. 5 things I can see, 4 things I can hear, 3 things that I can feel, right? 2 things. So you're going all the way through your senses. You're getting yourself down to 1 thing you can taste, this is a really helpful activity. It doesn't cost anything. It helps ground us. I often do that outside. So that is another thing. When we feel really bad about ourselves and really bad about what's happened, being out tends to kind of be the last thing we want to do. But it is something that your body needs that. Your body is storing all of this stuff. It really is, and taking its toll. So it's getting up and getting outside. It's real hard to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in an empty bedroom. So you got to get up and you got to do that. I'd also say find an interest. When we get stuck in our trauma, we tend to forget who we were, or at least I certainly did. And that was part of the gaslighting of what I went through. And then part of the surviving aspect of what I went through. It was really having my own worth, my own self diminished to the point where I couldn't even tell you anymore what I liked to do. And so you got to take a little bit of a risk and do some experimenting. It doesn't have to be expensive, but finding something that you like to do, whether that's walking downtown and looking at the window shopping, that can be really a therapeutic thing, or whether it is being out in nature, maybe it's a new activity or a new sport. I took up running in 2020. I'm not a runner. Anybody who knows me, I'm not but the feelings that I was getting afterwards were so grounding to me that made a huge difference. And I am an amateur watercolorist. One of my children is actually a very skilled artist. I am not, but I'm an amateur watercolorist, and I am an amateur watercolorist because when I get really dysregulated from my trauma, it is one of the ways that I can settle, is to do something very simple and put paint on paper. It's a sensory activity, right? It gives me some feedback, and sometimes I'm really excited about the results as well. But I had to experiment a lot to do that. So I'd say to everybody listening, go easy on yourself and look for those things. The self-care noise you're hearing in society is just that. It is a noise. Self-care is a well-established psychological process that we're supposed to go through that has nothing to do with our ability to spend money and everything to do with taking a minute and knowing who we are inside. If you don't find it the first time, look for the next thing. You're not broken. If your best friend likes to walk and you don't, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you need to go look for the next thing. So keep looking, because you will find it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are really, I love the practicality and just thinking different people have different accesses to different things, such as, and self-care. Yes, we have these luxurious things that we have there, but self-care is really, as you mentioned, what are things, and you said three things that you might love to do, like walking, and really walking helps repattern your brain. So walking or running, like you said, you picked up in 2020, and just doing things that you realize, okay, this does feel good, or even things that aren't, like you mentioned, the art. Okay, I'm doing this stuff, and maybe it's not the greatest gift you have, but it's still a gift, and you're working and learning. And so even doing things that are right near you, what's in your hand, right, what's in your community that will help you, and you have to find that, as you mentioned in the audience, find what works for you. If there's walking or painting or something that you have that would be helpful, talking to a friend. And I think those are important, because that self-care is really truly, how are you prioritizing yourself? How are you allowing time for yourself? So thank you for that, Nichole.
Well, and I think it gets you back in your body, right?
Yes.
When you've had trauma, you sort of, there's a wonderful story James Joyce wrote, and he says Mr. Darby lived a few feet from his body, is one of the quotes. And that's what happens to us in trauma. And so this is the way to bring yourself, a gentle way to bring yourself back to the trauma, from the trauma. And I would say that if you're doing something, I wrote a blog piece on this about self-care. You know, if the $200 jar of fancy cream really does make you feel good, that's marvelous. But if it's causing existential dread because it was a $200 jar of cream, then that's not self-care. Self-care always fills you up. It always leaves you filled up, and that should be your litmus, is, do I feel filled up by this? And it won't always be the same either. So you also, at some point, You maybe want to set aside one of those self-care practices. Maybe there's a new one you want to try, or you want to add to them. But I think that that's a really important way to do simple things. I'd also tell everybody that you can learn resilience, because we're doing this thing too, where we're passing resilience off like it's some kind of inherited trait, and it just isn't. This is a skill set. You can learn it. And when you learn it, self-care is actually part of that resilience piece. And it's going to help you navigate your way through growth and healing and trauma. These are kind of the base core foundational pieces you need to do post-traumatic growth work. If you can't engage in self-care and you can't regulate yourself and you can't really find yourself again, all the growth is going to be lost because it's not happening inside your body and inside your brain. So do this first, be gentle, take care of yourself, keep it simple.
I love it. Thank you so much, Nichole. And finally, as we're nearing the end of our wonderful talk, and I could talk, I'm sure we have a lot of different backgrounds forever, but we're here for this specific time. So audience, you can get some really simple and real good tools and get to know Nichole, but we are at the encouragement part. So one quote or phrase or something that has helped you, Nichole, as you began and thinking there are people listening in the audience that are at the beginning of their journey, perhaps the middle or perhaps further along, but may still need some type of encouragement.
Sure. So Elizabeth Gilbert is one of my favorite authors. A lot of people like her. She's written several books. A lot of people know Eat, Pray, Love, but there's this one little line in Eat, Pray, Love that really speaks to me when I talk to people about trauma. And it's on my website, it's on my Facebook page. You can find it everywhere. And it says, ruin is a gift. Ruin is the road to transformation. And while I don't subscribe to this notion that all things happen for a reason, I don't believe that what's happened to us was kind of universally assigned to us to carry. I don't believe in any of that. I do believe you can make meaning out of really rough things that have happened. And so you've had this trauma. Everybody who's listening has been through a trauma. And it can be a gift because it is your opportunity for transformation. When there's nothing else left, you get to build. And so know that you're entitled to do that you're empowered to do that you deserve to do that. That's what thrivership is for me, that you don't have to just sit there at the bottom of the ruin and say, oh, well, and I'm stuck here. This is my lot in life. This is your gift. This is your opportunity for transformation. So take that with you and transform and be amazing, because I think the world is full of amazing people.
I love that. Thank you so much, Nichole. And certainly, audience, if you connected with what Nichole had to say, I have her information that I'll post on the podcast, on my page, and also on the YouTube interview. So you can get in touch with her if that is something that really resonates with you. And if you have any questions or comments, if after you watch this, I certainly can get them back to Nichole. And so, Nichole, it's been a pleasure hearing your story, hearing your journey and how you've really come to where you are today. And I really appreciate and love how you help other people and want to encourage them and empower them right where they are and continue to move them forward. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure. And we could talk all day, but if somebody's listening, reach out, find me. We would love to share resources with you.
Wonderful. All right. So audience, this was our episode of the Traumaplicity, and certainly tune in next week. With that said, I always love to encourage you, and we always care about where you're at and where you're going. Remember that you are always loved, always valuable, and you always matter at all times, no matter what. And so that is your encouragement for today. Thanks again for tuning in. All right. Bye.
Bye.